Welcome to the World of Rare Disease, a show that focuses on awareness and education about rare and complex disorders. My name is Lisa Deck, and I am a rare disease patient, a Rare New England board member, and your host for today's show. Today, our guests include two patients with a rare disease called Moyamoya disease, Samantha Houle and Catherine Stratton, as well as Samantha's father, Dean Houle. Today, we are going to learn about Moyamoya disease, the patient experience, and some personal projects they've been working on. I am so thrilled to have you here today, Dean, Sam, and Catherine. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I must admit to start that this show is very close to my heart. I too am a Moyamoya patient and a board member for the Moyamoya Foundation Company. I will refrain today from telling my personal story, yet mine is very similar to Samantha's. So let's get started. I'd like to start with asking, what is Moyamoya disease and what are some of the symptoms?
So I'll take that. Moyamoya disease is a rare, progressive, cerebral vascular disease that causes blocked arteries at the base of the brain in the area called the basal ganglia. And the name Moyamoya means puff of smoke in Japanese, and it describes the look of the tangled tiny blood vessels that form when there's a blockage. And it's most prevalent on MRI or MRA.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that. So we are going to hear the couple stories of our patients. So first, I'd like to talk to Catherine. Hello, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good. And can you tell us where you are located? Because I think that's kind of fun.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm in Toronto in Canada, where I have grown up and lived most of my life.
Excellent. And so can you tell us about your experience with Moyamoya disease?
Yes, I can. So just to start off, my Moyamoya story actually starts a little bit before when I was diagnosed with Moyamoya. So I actually have an underlying genetic disorder called neurofibromatosis type 1. And so through research, we have found out that Moyamoya is associated or sort of linked with a few underlying conditions. And one of them is NF1. I'll just be calling it that for short, for obvious reasons. A few other conditions, again, just for background information, that have been linked with Moyamoya include Down syndrome, sickle cell anemia, and certain congenital heart defects. So I was already sort of a patient, if you will, from a young child with this genetic condition. And I was monitored at the Hospital for Sick Children, or Sick Kids, as it's affectionately known in Toronto. And for a while there, I was actually doing pretty well. I did have a history of seizures, and so those were being monitored, but I went several years without any seizures. And then in the summer of when I was 10, we were actually overseas for the summer. And I unfortunately started to present with symptoms that my parents thought were probably seizures. And, for a while we tried to remain calm, thinking it was just the heat. There was a very, very severe heat wave that summer. But of course, we were really in touch with my doctors immediately. And they said, well, it's all right. We'll get her in for an MRI and see what's going on. And so it was then after the MRI and then the MRA that I was diagnosed with Moyamoya disease. And so we realized that those seizure type symptoms were actually TIAs, or transient ischemic attacks, which is one of the tell-all symptoms of Moyamoya. So I was diagnosed, and it was when I was 11, when I turned 11, that I did have my surgery again at Sick Kids. And it went quite well from the standpoint that I haven't had any sort of Moyamoya symptoms since, but unfortunately, some of the vessels that Dean had referenced at the beginning of the conversation did rupture, and so I did have a hemorrhagic stroke during my surgery. And that was, of course, a complication that took me on a longer journey to recovery. I was in the ICU following my surgery. When I was released from hospital, I then went to the Bloorview Children's Rehabilitation Hospital to attend stroke rehab. And I was there for a full month as an inpatient and about 3 to 4 months as an outpatient, predominantly focusing on speech therapy because the location of my hemorrhagic stroke was right in the language area. And so I had very, very severe aphasia, but of course also occupational therapy, physical therapy, the works, if you will. And that's a bit of my story.
Right. So that had to be very hard as an 11-year-old. What is that? Elementary school, right? And trying to balance all of this and, trying to continue in school and friends and everything at the same time.
Certainly. I think, in one part, I think I was lucky is sort of a strange word to use, but to experience this as a child, because I had been I'd been a patient for so many years prior that I sort of was still used to things like a lot of doctor's appointments, a lot of tests, etc. But it certainly was then difficult being away from school for such an extensive period of time because other children won't understand that. And I mean, you can't really expect them to. And so that was more difficult. But if anything, that allowed me to try to think things from their perspective and just realize, if I did not have Moyamoya disease, would I have heard of it? Would I know that children too can have strokes? And I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, the answer is probably no. And that's why then when we are, given that role of a patient, we need to, it's sort of our obligation as well to try to educate and share our stories as best as we can.
Right. Well, you're doing that here today. So thank you very much. So with Moyamoya disease, I think a lot of children are diagnosed. There's definitely a majority that are diagnosed in a young age. And then there's kind of another phase of patients who are diagnosed more in the even 20 to 30 to 40-year-old. And so I want to flip over to Sam, and I would love for you to tell us your story and kind of how Moyamoya disease presented with you.
So I had my first stroke when I was 19. I was a sophomore in college, and I went to like one of the local hospitals by my school, and I had to go 3 times before they actually realized I was having a stroke. They thought because of my, it was during finals week, they thought because of my stress levels that I just had Bell's palsy or something like affected me through stress. And then they had me go back and get an MRI, and they saw that I had a stroke. So I had to be transferred to the higher trauma hospital, Dartmouth Hitchcock in New Hampshire, to where I actually got diagnosed with having Moyamoya. And it was really not hard, but like it was surprising because I was like, I had been a healthy 19-year-old. I danced all my life. I was very active and found that I had a stroke. I had to get sorry.
I'm going to jump in here while you find that sentence.
Yeah.
I was just going to tell our viewers that my story was very similar. I was 21 years old in finals week when I had my stroke. And it took me 2 hospital visits before they diagnosed me as well, because they told me it was stress as well. So it is an interesting circumstance that actually our lives have come in common with Samantha and her parents, that we kind of had this very similar presentation. We were both having strokes. We didn't know young, healthy women could have strokes. And here we are with this diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So for me, I would go about 18 years before my diagnosis would happen with Moyamoya disease, but that is my stories. So I'd love for you to continue, Samantha.
Sorry.
No, it's no problem. I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, for a second.
No, it's no problem.
Okay.
So what happened after your stroke and your diagnosis?
I had to recover from my first stroke. It took like a month, and then I had my first surgery on my right side. And my parents actually had to be called in Connecticut that I had a stroke and I was getting transferred to another hospital.
Yeah. Fortunately, you were diagnosed very quickly.
Yes.
Right.
And then after my surgery, everything went smoothly. I was able to go back for my back to school for my junior and senior year. I graduated with cum laude, and I was able to go actually teach. I teach 2-year-olds, so I went to start doing that in Connecticut. And then a couple months went by. I was 22, and my symptoms returns. I'm still on the opposite side. So the first time I was on my left side, this time I was on my right side. I went to a hospital in Hartford, and they said that I had a little TIAs, and they sent me home, and I was able to recover. And then I got in touch with my neurologist in New Hampshire, who got me in contact with a new surgeon in Boston. And I went to Boston Children's Hospital to get an MRI, where they said my brain was very delicate at that point. And I actually came home, and the next morning I had a stroke again.
How did you know?
So I texted my dad in the morning, and he called my mom and was like, that's not anything.
Did it make sense?
It was a whole jumble of words.
Mhm.
Didn't make any sense.
To me.
In your head, it made sense, right?
Yes.
Mhm.
So I had to go back to the Hartford in the ICU for 5 days.
Wow.
And I recovered from that. I had to go to speech therapy. They checked my physical, like my ability to walk and everything, and that was fine. They said it was just my speech that was, I had aphasia also. I couldn't think of anything that I wanted to say. Very frustrating.
Mhm.
Then I had to go back to Boston. I had my second surgery on my left side, then they actually did another surgery on my central to increase more blood flow, because the right side was not as long as they would like it to be.
Right.
So they hoped that would help the blood flow. And my surgery went well. And then as my way up to my room, I had 2 more strokes. Not anywhere near the surgical areas, so they did not know what caused it. But I had to spend 11 days in the ICU there with a feeding tube. I couldn't talk. I totally had to relearn how to talk and how to swallow and eat and all that. And
right.
Yeah.
And look at you now. You have a smile on your face, and you're speaking your story. So I love it. I think it's important to explain too, with Moyamoya disease, it causes strokes and seizures and TIAs. And while there is no cure, the treatment is brain surgery to revascularize or get the blood flowing again. And so that's why all of us have had these surgeries to try to get the blood flow to increase in the brain, to give back your abilities. So fortunately, we are some of the fortunate ones that are here and speaking out. And I think that's something we've all felt is very important. So I thank you for sharing your stories. I think another perspective that we want to share with our viewers is the caregiver. And Dean, I would love for you to talk about what was this like watching your daughter go through this. And it's interesting, when I had my first strokes in my early 20s, I relied on my parents. And then when I had my fourth stroke, I was suddenly a parent, and it was a very different perspective. So I'd love to hear you mention kind of what it felt like, and, talk about the experience.
Yeah, well, as Samantha had said, when we first were notified, she had been talking to me because it was Mother's Day weekend back in 2014 when all this started happening. And she happened to go up to my mom's house. My mom happened to live in the same town as her college. And they were doing things. And she was telling me some of the things that were going on. And, but it was in the middle of finals. And, so we didn't have long conversations. When she told me uh, everything that was going on, I got my mom to take her to the hospital those 3 different times. And the third time that she had taken her to the hospital was on a Monday, and I was, or on a Tuesday, I think it was, I was at work, and I got a call mid-morning at work from one of the doctors at the hospital that was checking her out. And he says, I hate to tell you this as a parent of who seems to be a perfectly healthy 19-year-old, that your daughter is having strokes right now, and that she needs to be transported to a level 1 trauma center to, be supported properly. I was blown away. It grabbed me. And I immediately called my wife, and we made the 3-hour journey from Connecticut, where we lived, up to Dartmouth, New Hampshire. I got to tell you, it was one of the longest rides. Just thinking about all the different things that could be going on. She's having a stroke. What is causing this to happen? At the time the doctor called me, they didn't know what it was. That, they didn't have anything to tell me. And me and my wife were talking the whole way through, Roxanne, and, just all the different possibilities. And when we were probably an hour away from the hospital, I got a call from my mom, because my mom had gone to the hospital with her, been transferred to the Dartmouth. And she says, they know what it is. She says, I'm not going to tell you much, but it is going to require probably a brain surgery. And oh my God, me and my wife were driving up there, and now we know that in order to fix this problem, she's going to have a brain surgery. What does this mean for her? It really got us, thinking. And the first occurrence really, upset her mother a lot more. I tried to be the rational one. As a matter of fact, Sam had the doctor call me instead of Roxanne, because she knew that I would be able to handle that information, whereas her mom would have probably freaked out about it.
Yeah.
The second time, when we went to Boston Children's this time, it was different, because as we walked into that room after she had her surgery, and I saw her on that bed, and I was the first one through the door and saw her, and I could see she was drooling, and she just did not look right. I'm like, something is happening here. I went right out of the room, got a nurse, and they came in, and they all started scurrying around, and realized that she had had more strokes. That one bothered me a lot more, because when, the doctors were there trying to get her to talk, she couldn't talk, she couldn't swallow. And to me, that was just devastating. It's like all of her her systems were shutting down. That really bothered me. Before, she was still talking to us. She was joking at the first time. This time she was just laying there and couldn't help herself. But, the doctors were really good. They got her out. They did everything they needed to do. The recovery went well. And, seeing her perk up and become that smiling person again. And it only took 11 days. It's amazing. It's amazing what the body can do. And, her mother and I have been by her side along with her boyfriend the whole time. Every single time she was in the hospital, we were there the whole time at each of the hospitals that she was there. And we had to be there to support her. And now she wants to give back, and we want to give back to the rare disease community because of that experience.
Right. Well, you almost just brought me to tears, because I know that
I get choked up a lot when I even talk about it.
I think, I know my mom, I was in Washington, D.C., and my family lives in Rhode Island. So about an 8-hour ride, but an hour and a half on the plane. But my parents also got the same call. So hearing that, it's the same. And I think in the rare disease space and in the Moyamoya world, this is a very common occurrence, and, patients and caregivers, it affects everybody. And I think that's something very important to mention. And thank you for sharing that, Dean, because I think it's important. It's not just the patient, it's the family. And Catherine, as you talk about as a 10-year-old, of course, that involves your family. And, it's really one of those things that's all encompassing to not only the patient and the caregiver, but the family. So thank you. So again, those are our personal stories. Thank you both for sharing. I want to talk a little bit about giving back. And I know all of you do it in your own way. I think I'm going to start with you, Catherine. I wanted to, I think really your experience kind of is what I believe led you to where your career is today. So I wanted to hear about your career and as you call it, your little projects, which I don't know if they're little, but I would love to hear about those.
Absolutely. So I currently do work in research, and I do want to become a clinician one day. And obviously my many years as a patient, I think definitely informed that decision to want to work in healthcare. And in particular, I just remember when I was volunteering at the hospital where I was a patient for so many years as a child, I had one moment in particular where I was volunteering again in the ICU, where of course I had been a patient and inpatient. And it was a very profound moment for obvious reasons to then walk those halls again in this new role, essentially. And so it was sort of at that moment that everything kind of solidified, and I decided I had to pursue this path. And so anyway, yes, I recently graduated with my Master's of Public Health in Chronic Disease Epidemiology, and now work in healthcare. But in any of my spare time, I definitely try to dedicate that to the Moyamoya community, the rare disease community, and the disability community sort of at large. And so I last summer joined the Moyamoya Foundation, hoping that my perspectives could be of use to the community, particularly the pediatric stroke kind of perspective that might not be as well known out there. And yeah, so as to what I'm doing right now with the foundation, because of some of my background in research, we collectively thought that it would be good if I could try to start a registry for the Moyamoya Foundation, of course, with the help of many amazing people, like the people in this chat room here, but also some of the wonderful researchers that we know out there, like Dr. Smith at Boston Children's, and some people like that. So we're currently working on that. And our hope is that with this registry, we're going to be able to really maximize the research that can be done into Moyamoya. So one of the most pressing challenges, if you will, with rare disease research, of course, is having sufficient people to conduct your research. There just are fewer people at any center, even these large centers like Boston Children's, relative to other conditions, there won't be as many people. So one way to try to combat that is you pool everyone together in a registry, you collect data into, what surgery they had, age of diagnosis, current age, outcomes, specific outcomes that they may have or may not have. And, with that, you sort of have this power in numbers that you couldn't really capture if you instead were going to do a study at your own institution with, the 7 patients that are currently being monitored there for Moyamoya. So our hope is that we'll be able to give the data, and then the wonderful researchers out there will use their brilliant minds and take the next step and do something with that data. So that's what we're working on right now.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. And I do think it is such a wonderful step to be happening for our community. So we really appreciate that work. And Sam, I wanted you to maybe talk about the Faces of Moyamoya Disease book.
Okay, I actually have it right here.
Oh, yes, let's see it. Ooh.
So this is a book that we, myself, Lisa, and actually my mom collaborated on. And it was actually Lisa's idea. She's the one that got the applied for the grant and was able to get the grant. I'm not I don't remember what the grant was, but
Yeah, it's through Healthy Voices we learned about it, and it was through the Community Foundation of New Jersey. We received a grant. And then Sam, like she said, Sam, Roxanne, and I collaborated on it. But yes, go ahead, Sam, and tell us what's in the book.
And it's actually a lot of stories of other patients and just our stories. And we want to show how we all have what we all have gone through. And we want to have a positive spin on it and for people to see, actually to know what happens after you get diagnosed, what happens after you have surgeries, and that it doesn't always have to end badly or have to be a bad thing. We really want to show it as like a positive after your diagnosis, and we want to give back to our community because it's something that we all wish we had something to look at before. Because personally, when I got diagnosed, all we had to look at was one website, and they said, don't look at any of the videos, just read what it is. And I was like, okay. So it was.
Yeah.
So we really want to have something that we could share with everyone that might have heard of it, might not have heard of it, doctors, give it to hospitals, and
There are 37 patient stories in there, right?
Yes.
I think
And
so.
you
Yes,
and
there's-
Catherine are part
Yes,
of them.
me, Catherine, and Lisa, we're all
All of our stories are there, and there's
Yeah.
37 patient stories captured. And really, the goal is to empower the patients who were telling the stories and then provide it to newly diagnosed patients so that they have hope and that they can learn a little bit more, and then start a conversation with their physician and medical doctors. So, so we have done that. I have one final question. Where could somebody go to find out more about Moyamoya disease?
Well, the Moyamoya Foundation does have a website where people could go out to that moyamoya-foundation.org and go to the resources tab. And there we have links to the National Institute of Health, Mayo Clinic, and Johns Hopkins, just specifically what Moyamoya is. And then there are also several hospitals that have Moyamoya programs, which they tell you about their programs. And there's some other support groups information available in there.
Wonderful. Well, great. Well, thank you all so much for being here and sharing your stories. I know sometimes it's hard, but I think there's such value in others hearing about your experiences. So thank you very much for doing that. Before closing, we want to speak about the part of our show that's called Rare New England. Monthly, Rare New England will showcase an episode of the World of Rare Disease on our Facebook page, which includes an interactive interview with our guests along with the screening. This show, along with all of our shows, can also be found on the Rare New England YouTube page and our social media accounts. Have a question for us? Rare New England in Motion is the perfect way to expand upon our mission of engaging with our community. Please send an email to info@rarenewengland.org with any comments or questions, and we will include it in our show. From all of us here at Rare New England and all the patients and families who keep rare disease in motion, thank you for watching. And remember, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, then think zebras. Thank you.